Power has always whispered behind a veil. It rarely shouts, never begs. It waits in the silence of calculated choices, buried not in armies or declarations, but in the subtle corners of perception, how people see, what they believe, and the illusions they're too comfortable to question. Niccolò Machiavelli, that quiet storm of the Renaissance, did not invent manipulation, but he distilled it into its purest, most unsettling essence. He saw that real power doesn't command your actions, it colonizes your mind. While rulers postured in robes and crowns, Machiavelli pulled back the curtain. He wrote for those who would rather govern reality than obey it. It is not necessary to be virtuous, he implied, only to seem so. Behind every gesture of goodness, a mechanism of control. Behind every show of mercy, a seed of fear. He understood something most moralists couldn't stomach, that perception is more powerful than truth, and that people don't really want freedom. They want stories that make obedience feel noble. This is not about cruelty. It's about the brilliance of invisible influence. Machiavelli's prince doesn't need to bind your hands. He only needs to shape the world in which you think. If you believe he is just, you will obey. If you believe the war was necessary, you will fight. If you believe the cage is a sanctuary, you will thank him for locking the door. To Machiavelli, the true battlefield wasn't politics, it was psychology. A sovereign, he believed, must understand the mechanics of human nature like a blacksmith knows iron. We are not led by truth but by emotion, not by facts but by fear, by hope, by appearance. The prince knows this, and he sculpts the minds of his people not through reason, but through myth. Control the narrative and you control the people. So he warned the rulers, don't waste time on the impossible task of making people virtuous. Make them believe they are virtuous while acting in your interest. Don't abolish fear, disguise it as loyalty. Don't silence critics, elevate distractions. Don't forbid rebellion, define it. Let the people cheer for their own submission. Machiavelli understood what the modern world still struggles to admit. Morality in the hands of power is a tool, not a destination. He didn't ask how to be good, he asked how to be effective. And in this, his genius turns dark, not because he encouraged evil, but because he exposed how thin the line is between virtue and manipulation, between compassion and control. A ruler who feeds the people bread is admired. A ruler who convinces the people they're full without ever feeding them is worshipped. This is the Machiavellian mind, cool, perceptive, strategic, not sadistic, but unsentimental. He doesn't torture, he distracts. He doesn't conquer, he frames. He doesn't restrict action, he infiltrates desire. If he controls what you want, he never needs to lift a finger. You will act according to his plan and think it was your own idea, and that is his dark brilliance, to make the cage invisible, the leash psychological. Machiavelli saw the world as it is, not as it ought to be. And this refusal to moralize reality gave him an uncanny clarity. He didn't see humans as rational, justifiable beings. He saw them as frightened, proud, reactive, easily swayed by fear, easily pacified by illusion. Not evil, not good, just predictable. But in predicting us, he became dangerous. Because those who understand human nature truly and without illusion can bend it at will. They don't rule by force. They govern through imagination. They become puppeteers of perception. That's what made Machiavelli not just a political thinker, but a prophet of psychological strategy. He knew that a clever ruler could craft not just laws, but a worldview. Not just punish behavior, but condition thought. And once you own the lens through which people see, you no longer need to act. You simply define reality. So while others debated ethics, Machiavelli wrote blueprints. While others chased ideals, he asked, how do things actually work? What makes people follow? And the answer, he knew, is terrifyingly simple. They follow what feels true, not what is true. He asked, why control bodies when you can control belief? Imagine a ruler who commits no crime, but ensures that every question leads only to the answers he's already prepared. Imagine a government that doesn't punish, but gently guides, not your behavior, but your framework for interpreting behavior. That is the ultimate power, not violence, not surveillance, but the quiet, patient shaping of minds over time. In this way, Machiavelli prefigures Orwell and Foucault, not in their politics, but in their precision. He knew that authority doesn't shout from above, it whispers from within. The most obedient subjects are not the ones who fear the whip, they're the ones who believe they're free. This is why Machiavelli remains not just relevant, but unnerving. Because he saw through the centuries of performance, the rituals of virtue and democracy and justice, and understood that the most effective rulers are not those who stop evil, but those who redefine it. You don't need to hide the truth, just make it irrelevant. You don't need to stop people from asking questions, just flood them with answers. And above all, don't command action. Control assumptions. This, he knew, is the future of control, and as history unfolds, we find him not fading into obscurity, but rising as a dark oracle of modern influence. From corporate messaging to political spin, from the optics of charity to the theater of power, Machiavelli's ghost haunts every stage. Not with malevolence, but with clarity. He didn't teach us how to be cruel. He taught us how the appearance of goodness can be weaponized. And that's where we continue into the next layer of his genius, where manipulation is not imposed but invited, where obedience becomes a performance of identity, and where the game is not to dominate, but to define the self of the dominated. The brilliance of Machiavelli lies not in raw domination, but in how quietly domination can disappear behind the mask of choice. He understood that the most enduring form of power is not when the prince issues commands, but when the people feel they are acting of their own accord, while walking paths carefully laid for them. You don't need to chain people when you've trained them to chain themselves. This is the deeper layer of psychological rule. Once Machiavelli's prince has shaped perception, has defined the stories, the threats, the heroes and enemies, he can step back. The people themselves will enforce the narrative. They will police each other's loyalty. They will call disobedience irrational, rebellion dangerous, doubt unpatriotic. All this without any sword drawn. What Machiavelli glimpsed is what modern systems now perfect: self-regulating obedience. The kind that flows not from top-down orders, but from horizontal conformity. It's no longer just the ruler who shapes minds. It is society, culture, media, schooling, etiquette. 1,000 small influences that create a prison without walls. And guards who don't even know they're guards. The prince doesn't tell people what to think. He gives them something to believe in, something noble, something moral, something they'll fight for. Not because he commands it, but because it feels like who they are. That's the Machiavellian genius. Don't suppress the ego, recruit it, convince people that obedience is a reflection of their highest values. And they will not only comply, they will evangelize. They will condemn dissenters, not on behalf of power, but in defense of truth, goodness, progress, security, God, the nation, the children, the future. Whatever symbol is useful, whatever idea binds. And what makes this terrifying is how little violence is needed. In the old model of tyranny, rulers relied on brutality. But Machiavelli saw that fear needn't be physical. It could be emotional, existential, spiritual, fear of exile, shame, humiliation, of being wrong, of being outside the fold. He understood that people would rather be wrong with the crowd than right and alone. So instead of silencing dissent, redefine it as madness. Instead of punishing rebellion, label it heresy. Instead of censoring truth, drown it in noise. This is the art of mental conquest, where even resistance becomes part of the system, where controlled opposition is allowed, even encouraged, as long as it stays within the lines. Let the people rage at puppet enemies. Let them vote between hand-picked choices. Let them scream into voids already soundproofed. It exhausts them, and it affirms the illusion of freedom. Machiavelli didn't merely speak to rulers, he warned them, power is perishable unless it adapts. A leader who relies on force alone will fall to resentment, but a leader who governs the emotional weather of a society, who molds desire, fear, pride, and identity, will rule long after his face is forgotten. And this rule doesn't always wear a crown. It wears logos, flags, hashtags. It smiles behind philanthropy. It kneels with the people while pocketing the throne. It does not conquer nations. It manages perceptions. It does not declare war. It narrates necessity. It doesn't censor directly. It just trains people not to listen. This is not ancient theory. It is the present tense. It is the algorithm, the headline, the carefully placed outrage, the ritual of opinion. And through it all, the Machiavellian template persists. Control what people think they're fighting for, and you never have to fight them. At its root, Machiavelli's philosophy is surgical. He cuts away idealism not to destroy it, but to expose how easily it is used. Not how to kill hope, but how to hijack it. He does not say, abandon morality. He says, understand how morality functions, as theater, as code, as mirror. A leader must appear just, loyal, compassionate, not be these things. Because people don't follow the truth, they follow symbols of the truth. They are moved by the gestures, not the substance. A public apology, a flag at half-mast, a viral moment. These are not actions, but psychological markers. They say, this is good, and that is enough. Machiavelli's realism is not cruelty, it is clarity. He describes the world not as it should be, but as it functions. And by doing so, he reveals the frightening ease with which human beings can be shaped. He dares to suggest that you don't need to control people's lives, just their narratives. That once you own the story they tell themselves about who they are, you own them completely. In this way, he invites us to ask, what parts of your identity were given to you? What loyalties do you serve that were chosen for you? What ideas do you defend that you've never examined? And who benefits from your certainty? This is where Machiavelli's ghost truly haunts us. Not in the palace, but in the mirror. He forces us to confront not only how others control us, but how often we participate in our own control, how we want to believe the powerful are just, how we need to think we're free, how we crave the safety of belonging more than the risk of truth, because to step outside the narrative is to feel lost, and so we stay inside it, blaming, voting, protesting, hoping, obeying, never quite asking, whose story is this? Machiavelli's genius is dark, not because it encourages tyranny, but because it exposes the ingredients of tyranny in everyday things, in respectability, in ritual, in collective hope, in the illusion of consent. And here is the paradox. Once you understand this, you are both free and afraid. Free because you see. Afraid because now you must choose. Will you keep pretending, or will you risk alienation for authenticity? Machiavelli offers no comfort. He doesn't give answers. He holds up the mask and lets you decide if you'll take it off. But he does offer this whisper of guidance. The world is ruled not by those who are powerful, but by those who are seen as necessary, become necessary to the people's idea of themselves. And you are untouchable, and that is where we go next, into the final stage of his dark genius, where control becomes identity, where thought becomes loyalty, and where the real ruler is no longer a man, but a myth. And so the final act begins, not with swords or speeches, but with silence. A silence so complete that people stop questioning. A silence that doesn't come from fear, but from absorption. When the mind has been fully mapped, there is no longer a need to coerce behavior. People live as they are expected to live. They feel what they're supposed to feel. They think what serves the system. And they believe it all began with their own voice. This is Machiavelli's most unsettling insight. The perfect tyranny is invisible, not because it hides, but because it becomes indistinguishable from life itself. It is not enforced through terror, but through trust, through norms, through culture, through the quiet, unconscious repetition of beliefs that no one remembers choosing. He warned us of this. In The Prince, he wrote not only for kings, but for the architects of narrative, those who shape the frame, not just the picture. He understood that real power survives not by imposing rules, but by creating a world where no other rules are imaginable. That's why Machiavelli's legacy isn't found only in autocrats. It lives in marketing firms, political campaigns, school curricula, and social algorithms. It thrives in the subtle architecture of consent, in the sacredness of slogans, in the soft cage of belonging. He decoded how to build not a prison, but a stage. And on that stage, the people would act out their roles, never realizing the script was handed to them long ago. But this too raises a deeper question, a more dangerous one. Can the mind ever be truly free? If we are so easily nudged, so hungry for story, so desperate for certainty, are we not always vulnerable to some Machiavelli, some manipulator, some system that wraps its fingers around our insecurities and calls them destiny? Machiavelli didn't only sketch a guide for rulers. He mapped the weakness in all of us, the place where fear overrides reason, the part that prefers illusion over complexity, the ache for order in a chaotic world. That is the lever, the hinge, the soft spot every ruler touches. And so the control of minds becomes not just a strategy, but a prophecy. Because as long as people seek meaning more than truth, Machiavelli will never die. His principles will be reborn in every age, dressed in new colors, spoken in new tongues, but always whispering the same message: control the story, and you control the soul. Yet this script can end another way, not with revolution in the streets, but revolution in thought. Not by attacking the tyrant, but by refusing to need one. When we begin to ask why we believe, who taught us to feel what we feel, what we're afraid of losing, then and only then does the spell begin to break. Because Machiavelli's darkness is only invincible to those who never question the light they're shown. We must become harder to manage, not cruel, not paranoid, but awake. Capable of holding doubt, willing to be outsiders, ready to peel back the masks even when it leaves us naked. This is not comfortable, it is not easy, but it is the only form of resistance that cannot be co-opted. It is to say, I will no longer confuse safety with freedom. It is to refuse the binary choices, the media echo chambers, the false saviors. It is to reclaim thought, not by reacting, but by reflecting, not by shouting louder, but by digging deeper. And sometimes that means walking away from the crowd, letting go of the narrative, standing in the terrifying silence of your own mind. Only there can something real begin, because Machiavelli's final trap is not the tyrant. It is the self that fears being free. So don't just spot the manipulation, disarm it. Don't just mock the system, detach from it. Don't just reject the lies, heal the part of you that needed them. This is the new kind of power, not to rule others, but to rule your own mind, to be ungovernable in the truest sense, not hostile, not chaotic, but sovereign, anchored in your own inquiry, your own values, your own awareness of how influence works. This is what Machiavelli never accounted for. A person who sees through the illusion, yet doesn't turn bitter, who sees the darkness, but chooses clarity instead of control, who understands the game, but no longer needs to play it. And in that, there is hope. A different kind of power, one that doesn't need followers, because it doesn't seek domination. It seeks truth, integrity, and the quiet rebellion of a mind that refuses to be bought. If this idea speaks to you, if you feel the pull of it, then you already know what must be done, not tomorrow, not when it's easy, but now, right here, in your own mind, where the real battle has always been. So think deeper, question harder, stand quieter, because the only thing more dangerous than Machiavelli's genius is a person who sees it and still chooses to be free. If this message lit something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, speak it, spread it. The world needs fewer rulers and more minds on fire. Subscribe, comment, speak your truth before someone else writes it for you.